Why do competitive Pokemon players always click moves like Stealth Rock and Spikes and U-Turn? Are they evil? Is something wrong with them? Perhaps. But also they are trying to maximize their chances of winning and reduce risk. Let's take a look at the most popular strategies in competitive Pokemon singles, and why they are so good and widely used. First of all, we have hazard stacking, perhaps the most successful and popular overarching strategy in all of competitive singles. Entry hazards are moves that deal damage to the enemy Pokemon as they switch in. First there was Spikes, introduced in Gen 2 and buffed in Gen 3. A simple entry hazard that deals set damage to switch-ins, and doesn't affect flying Pokemon. Then Stealth Rock was introduced, a rock-type entry hazard that deals damage based on a Pokemon's rock weakness. These are the main two hazards that are popular and competitive, but you also see Toxic Spikes, occasionally too, an entry hazard that applies poison. There is also Sticky Web, which we will discuss later in its own section. Hazard stacking is incredibly popular because it is the most reliable way to force damage against the enemy in competitive singles. Full stop. Switching is a fundamental part of the game. You're constantly switching out to a different Pokemon to resist an incoming hit or wall a certain type of damage. So if every single time the enemy switches they take a little bit of chip damage, that adds up. And therefore entire strategies are built around maximizing the value from that chip damage. Ensuring that your Pokemon are reliably able to set their hazards, maintaining the hazards on the field, and getting the most out of the hazard damage as well. Rapid Spin is a move that can remove hazards from the field, so it's very popular to run Ghost types on teams that stack hazards, because Ghost types can block Rapid Spin from taking effect. Since Ghost types are immune to normal type attacks, Rapid Spin will have no effect against them, and Ghost types help to keep your hazards on the field, and keep this game plan moving. Later in the series, Defog was introduced, a new form of hazard removal that could not be stopped by Ghost types. This led to the rise of Taunt users to stop Defog from taking effect that way, by taunting the enemy. People also started to employ the tactic of self-KOing their own Pokemon. Because if a Pokemon is fainted and there's nothing on the field, Defog will fail, and so will Rapid Spin. It's going to be a good way to, at least in the short term, keep your hazards up. Players also started to employ Pokemon with Defiant as a form of counterplay against Defog. Defog not only removes hazard, it has the effect of lowering the enemy's evasiveness. And if a Pokemon with Defiant has a stat lowered, they receive an attack boost. So if they use Defog, they are going to have to deal with a strong +2 attack Bisharp, putting them between a rock and a hard place. In Generation 8, Heavy Duty Boots were introduced to the game, a paradigm-shifting item that simply grants a complete immunity to hazards. This led to a metagame where Knockoff was commonly employed to try to remove as many enemy boots as possible so that your hazards had the same effectiveness as they used to. And in Generation 9, with the release of Goldengo, there was another paradigm shift in the hazard metagame, as Goldengo is the first Pokemon ever that can block Defog from taking effect. Goldengo is also conveniently a Ghost type, meaning it also blocks Rapid Spin. Goldengo is the best Pokemon we have ever seen at preventing hazards from being removed. Hazards are an unavoidable part of competitive singles. They are just a very safe way to get guaranteed damage on your enemy and progress your game plan of eliminating all of their Pokemon. It is the safest way to put yourself at an advantage by making hazards and preventing the enemy from doing so. It is probably the most powerful mechanic in competitive singles. Some people find this a little bit lame, understandably. I mean, when you're a child playing Pokemon, you never really use this mechanic. It's not very good in the single player game. When it comes to the flavor and excitement of the whole concept of Pokemon itself, safely setting little caltrops on the field and clicking raw over and over isn't exactly something they would include in the anime, let's put it that way. I think that every generation has a different hazard metagame too, because in every generation there are different hazard setters that are viable or unviable, different rapid spinners, different hazard removers, so this has an imperative impact on the health of the game. This is why a lot of people in Gen 9 do not enjoy the presence of Goldengo, because of how it morphs the hazard metagame around itself and makes hazard stacking strategies much more effective. Whether you like hazards or not, they are unavoidable in competitive singles, but I definitely do think it feels better when you have more control over hazards. Good metagames have multiple viable rapid spinners or defog users and are able to pretty reliably use those moves without feeling too constrained. If the hazard metagame feels like it's too much, it can skew things in an unfortunate direction. At least if you have control, it doesn't feel like every game centers too much around hazards, which it can sometimes. I do think that hazards have the positive effect of punishing greedy teams. Without hazards in the game, stall teams might be significantly better because there would be less punishment for constantly making defensive switches. The metagame does need some way to force progress against defensive Pokemon, and hazards are a way to do that. I think that one of the worst things to happen in Gen 9 is not just the addition of Goldengo to the metagame, but the severe restriction of the amount of Pokemon that get defogged. Corviknight for a long time was the only OU ranked Pokemon that learned defog. Recently, Galarian Weezing has risen up to OU status, partially because it is a solid Pokemon that gets defog, in a world where it is such a scarce option now. So many Pokemon lost this key option that is vital for metagame health, and we are really feeling the ripple effects of that. The next strategy I'd like to talk about is VoltTurn. This is a strategy categorized by the use of multiple pivoting moves on a team. Pivoting moves are attacks that will deal damage and then switch out the user. And these are incredibly popular in competitive because of how safe they are to use. This is going to be a common theme in this video, is reducing risk and making guaranteed progress against the enemy. U-turn is one of the best moves in competitive Pokemon history because it is a move that deals damage and then switches you out, allowing you to perfectly respond to whatever's in front of you while dealing a little bit of damage in the process. It is a perfect way to gain information and also chip the enemy down over time. A lot of people often ask the question of why is pivoting so much better than just directly switching? And it's because of the order that it happens in a turn. Switching is the first thing that occurs in a turn. So if you choose to switch in a Pokemon, you'd have no information about what the enemy will do. This decision is locked in and then it will execute, and you're not sure if it will be a good decision or not. However, if you use a move that switches you out, you can see whether your opponent has switched out or not first, because this will happen at the start of a turn. So if they make a defensive switch to try to respond to what's in front of them, like switching Blissey in against a Dragapult, and the Dragapult selects U-turn, you can then switch in a physical threat and force out the Blissey again. You can perfectly respond to what they just did because you have information about what they've switched into already. Information is everything. And this play that maximizes the amount of information you can have at your disposal and allows you to keep momentum up is obviously something that is worth building whole teams around. You can seriously lean into just getting the most out of pivoting moves, and it is a very effective way to go. Volt Switch is another pivoting option that is an electric type special attack. It is slightly more limited than U-turn because ground types are immune to it and those with Volt Absorb are immune to it, but it is still extremely powerful to be able to pivot with a solid electric type special attack. If the enemy team happens to have no electric immunity on it, or you have eliminated their one electric immunity, Volt Switch becomes borderline the best move in the game. It becomes extraordinarily spammable, dealing good damage while giving you perfect information to keep making strong plays. And it becomes even crazier when you pivot into other pivots and just keep pivoting forever, as the enemy slowly makes defensive switches and just loses all their health and dies. Pivoting to another pivot is a really good strategy, and so is pivoting to a wall breaker. The problem with wall breakers a lot of the time, like Crawdaunt for example, is that it's hard to get them on the field. Pivoting moves help you get these weak, slow Pokemon on the field in situations where they are favored. For example, that Blissey situation. They go to Blissey, you U-turn with Dragapult, now you have Crawdaunt in, and the enemy is screwed. Because a Crawdaunt knockoff is gonna kill the Blissey in front and devastate any switch in even if they resist, with its overwhelming amount of damage and item removal effects being impossible to safely switch in against. Pivoting allows these Pokemon with insane breaking power to hit the field safely in situations where they can click their best move risk-free. Overall, pivoting just reduces risk massively and gets progress and momentum to work in your favor. Now, there is some counterplay to pivoting. One form of counterplay to U-turn in particular is contact punishing effects. U-turn is a physical attack that makes contact with the enemy. So a Rocky Helmet will at least force the U-turn user to take a bit of damage if they want to safely pivot. and this can be a really great way to actually chip down U-turn spammers. U-turn can also be punished by contact effects like static or flame body. These are abilities with a 30% chance to inflict a status ailment on contact, making U-turn feel less safe to use and less spammable without risk. Volt Switch does not have this problem because it's a special attack. You cannot be punished on contact, but Volt Switch is limited because of electric immunity being extremely common. But this does not really stop VoltTurn from being extremely popular and powerful in competitive singles and seen constantly in high-level play. If you're asking me, I personally think that these safe pivoting moves are not a good thing. I think that they're a bit too powerful for what they do, and it's why I enjoyed Gen 3 OU a lot, is because these moves didn't exist back then. There is no U-turn or Volt Switch in Gen 3. There is only Baton Pass, which just pivots without dealing any damage. I think that is much more balanced. But it's just another one of those unavoidable aspects of modern competitive singles. All these Pokemon constantly doing U-turns, maybe they should make up their mind about where they want to be. Another U-turn? Going in the opposite direction again, are we? How about going straight ahead? How about that for a change? U-turn is a move that rewards indecisiveness. I believe this to be cowardly and dishonorable. But I'm not the one who makes the rules, regrettably. Up next is the strategy of bulky offense, and it's a pretty simple one. The idea of bulky offense is to use Pokemon that are often slow, but very defensively potent and also very offensively threatening at the same time. The reason this is popular is also pretty simple. You're killing two birds with one stone. You have Pokemon that can switch in defensively on things and respond to aggression, while outputting aggression themselves. A great example, and one of the most popular Pokemon in Gen 9, is Galarian Slowking. Galarian Slowking has great HP and special defense stats. It can switch in against a lot, and has the ability Regenerator, allowing it to safely heal by simply switching out of the field. But Galarian Slowking also has a really respectable special attack stat of 110. It can use the option of Future Sight, which is an attack that hits 2 turns after being used, and has a very high power with stab damage. The threat of this incoming big hit makes it awkward for the enemy to maneuver and find their footing. Galarian Slowking also has Nasty Plot to boost up its special attack, as well as plenty of great coverage options like Sludge Bomb for Poison Snap and Flamethrower and Ice Beam. It's other special attacking options. Zamazenta has been a popular Pokemon in Gen 9 OU, obviously. I mean, it's a Legendario, but it's also because it combines defense, offense, and speed all at once. It is fast, defensively great because of its Dauntless Shield ability and high stats, and it has good damage output. That's a popular Pokemon. Zapdos has been a classic Pokemon on these kinds of teams for about as long as ever, since Gen 1 to be honest, because it is great at operating defensively and offensively at the same time. It is helping you out against imperative enemy Pokemon like Great Tusk and Landorus Therian, and Ogerpon Wellsprig a little bit, while also outputting good offense itself with its fantastic Stab Hurricane and Volt Switch. I spoke in my last video about the strategy Stall, which is infamous in competitive Pokemon, a strategy focused on maximizing defense with healing and status, and wearing your opponent out of resources as the main game plan. But Stall has never been as popular as bulky offenses throughout the years, because bulky offense is a little bit better at keeping up the pace. Stall is passive, it is slow, it is easy to take advantage of. It's often not even good. But bulky offense, you get to have defensive switch-ins that also deal damage. I mean, that is clearly superior most of the time. I generally think Pokemon that have a good combination of offense and defense are good for competitive formats. So I tend to like a bulky offense because it leans into that much more than any other archetype. Up next we have Sticky Web. Some people might find it a bit contentious for me to include this in a popular strategies list, but I think it's worth including because it's rare that a single move has such an impact on not only the viability of the Pokemon that get access to it, but the formation of entire archetypes around it. Sticky Web is a move that can make Pokemon OU relevant, despite nothing else about them being that desirable, like Araquanid, Ribombee, and Shuckle. And its effect is powerful enough to enable a unique brand of offensive teams. Sticky Web is an entry hazard, but unlike other ones, it doesn't deal damage. Instead, Sticky Web will lower the speed of grounded foes by 1 stage on switch in. Speed is probably the most important stat in the game for aggression. If you are faster than the enemy, you have the advantage, obviously. Sticky Web makes it so that you are faster than the enemy much more of the time by simply just clicking one little move. And Sticky Web is incredible at enabling offensive teams. Slower Pokemon that usually don't have the speed advantage, like in Gen 9, King Gambit or Raging Bolt, become incredible with Sticky Web for support. Even if you're a fast Pokemon, you appreciate Choice Scarf users, or Pokemon that match your speed or maybe outrun you, being nerfed by this Sticky Web and giving you the advantage. Sticky Web allows you to just run 5 other offensive threats on a team and get away with it because reducing the speed of the enemy every time they come in is such a detriment that it is going to sink their momentum and give you all of the cards. Sticky Web is probably the best move in the game at enabling offense, and I think that is exemplified by Araquanid here, maintaining an OU position over multiple tier ships, and Ribombee doing the same in previous metagames, purely because they are good at setting Sticky Web. Sticky Web is interesting. I'm always a bit torn on it. In one sense, I enjoy that it is a unique design for a hazard, completely separate from the other ones. In fact, it is often not even used in the same context as them. Sticky Web teams are entirely separate to other hazard stacking teams, and lean into different advantages. I also think that Sticky Web teams can feel a little bit annoying to face. When you're just slower than all these offensive Pokemon and getting destroyed by them, it does feel like your options can be limited. But to be fair, Sticky Web does have, I think, enough counterplay in the modern gens for this to feel relatively fair. Flying Pokemon are not affected by Sticky Web. That's a big deal, giving plenty of your Pokemon the ability to avoid this unfortunate speed decrease. Heavy duty boots, of course, block Sticky Web, as does the simple act of rapid spinning or defogging. Now, Sticky Web teams have a new lease on life in Gen 9 with the addition of Goldengo, who is outstanding at preventing hazard removal, keeping Sticky Web active. So that does make it a little bit awkward to play against at times, especially because Goldengo itself benefits from it, being a offensively powerful Pokemon that is kind of low on the speed side. It itself benefits from Sticky Web synergy, while also maintaining it. I think Sticky Web is okay, I guess. At least it gives bug types something to do in competitive. They certainly need it. There was even a team that used Livanni to success because of its access to Sticky Web, and I think that is a fun sentence. So I'm glad that Sticky Web exists, I suppose, because it brought that into reality. And finally, by far the most popular team archetype and general idea in competitive singles ever would be balance. And it's a broad term that can describe many different kinds of teams, but the general idea is for balanced teams to have a little bit of everything. They have a combination of a good defensive core, good offensive Pokemon, and important utility options like defog, rapid spit, etc. They are trying to have the tools to handle everything, and also trying to do a little bit of everything. They've got some fast Pokemon, some slow Pokemon, some completely defensive, some win condition Pokemon. Why not do everything, is the ethos here. Why not have a backup plan for everything? A Pokemon that can cover every scenario. Balanced teams tend to have the most positive matchup spread in the game. They tend to be pretty well equipped to handle just about anything. It can be a disadvantage to be spread thin and not lean into certain strengths. Hyper offense teams have more aggression than balanced teams. Stall teams are better at keeping games going longer than balanced teams. But generally, balanced teams are in the middle, and that middle point is a good place to exist. I think in a fitting turn of events as well, that balanced teams feel the most fair to play with and against, because in a balanced mirror, you're sort of evenly matched in your resources. There can be different matchup variants, but overall you're going to both have similar amounts of defensive and offensive pressure that you can dish out. And these games are going to be usually determined by who is the better player, who is better at using their resources. Sometimes balanced teams can struggle, though, at covering absolutely every matchup. That is kind of their goal, to cover as many matchups as possible, but this can be a fruitless task that drives you a little bit insane. And balanced teams can have trouble in tumultuous metagames. In Gen 5, it is famously really difficult to build a team that covers everything, because there are just offensive Pokemon in that game that can tear apart entire teams with the right set. Volcarona, formerly Cloyster, and offensive Pokemon like Dragonite and Breloom are able to do this. Gen 9 has had much the same issue, with Dragon Dance Kyurem being kind of a balance destroyer, especially because it can have so many different sets, and without knowing which set exactly it has, you are left to just guess. Iron Valiant is a fast threat with many different coverage options it can have that can tear apart a balanced core very easily with the right options. There has been Roaring Moon and Gouging Fire, and all of these anti-balance Pokemon in Gen 9 actually. Some of these guys are banned, but some of them aren't, and sometimes if you're laddering in Gen 9, bringing a balanced team doesn't feel like the play. Sometimes it actually feels more reliable to ignore the impossible task of answering everything and just try to output a bunch of aggression yourself. The hyper offense teams have been very popular in Gen 9 for this reason, or at least teams with a faster pace than traditional balance. Balanced teams are the most difficult to build, and the most difficult to use in a lot of cases, because you have to deeply understand the teams, understand your game plans against your worst matchups. Covering everything is often a very complicated task, and that is where the difficulty of balance comes into play. I think in many regards in life, maintaining balance is difficult. Walking on a tightrope, that's difficult. How do you balance on that? There's not much space to walk, but with expertise and precision, you can walk across the rope and get to the other side. Many will fall attempting to do so, but the best of the best will successfully walk across the rope. Balance is historically the best, most consistent, and also most difficult to use and skillful Pokemon team archetype. There is often a phenomenon where at the start of the metagame balance suffers, but as a metagame develops and evolves, balance rises to the top, because it takes longer to figure out good balance teams. It takes longer to build them and learn how to use them, as well as the metagame having to settle to even understand what you're building for. But balance often rises from the debris at the end of a metagame to prove itself as the most consistent team style in the game. It has happened time and time again. Many of these strategies can be frustrating to face as they are optimizing for success, and sometimes frustratingly good at doing so, where you feel as if you are slowly being worn down by hazards and pivoting, and threats getting perfect entry points, and other such things. I think this is simply the reality of playing a competitive game. People are going to try to optimize things, reduce risk, and enhance win rates. And I think it's important to find joy in these things, find joy in the pursuit of perfection, because there is fulfillment to be had there. And if you're not fond of the strategies that rise to the top of a metagame, I think it's good to consider other metagames, and maybe play one where the top strategies are more in line with your own personal value. What do you think though, folks? Am I talking nonsense? Am I very smart? Am I saying smart things? Am I somewhere in between? Perhaps a balance of both? Let me know down below in the comments. And thank you for watching.